The conservatory, which had been the stage for our elaborate trap, now became the setting for the final dramatic confrontation. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and exotic blossoms, a cloying perfume that seemed to be mixed with the metallic tang of fear and hatred. The moonlight, streaming through the glass panes, bathed the scene in a pale, ethereal glow, transforming the familiar wilting plants into a forest of strange and menacing shapes. It was a fitting backdrop for the unmasking of a monster. Eleanor Vance, her face a mask of pure, cold fury, stood cornered between the table of chemical apparatus and the towering, shadowy form of Sherlock Holmes. The mask of the sad, fragile orphan had been utterly destroyed, revealing the true face that lay beneath, the face of a ruthless and calculating killer. "It is over, Miss Vance," Holmes said, his voice low and steady, yet ringing with an iron authority. "There is nowhere left to run. The game is up." She did not speak. She simply stared at him, her eyes burning with a venomous hatred. She was like a cornered serpent, poised to strike, her mind racing, I knew, to find some way out of the net that had been so expertly thrown around her. It was then that Holmes began his final, masterful summation. He did not address her directly, but rather spoke to me, and to the hidden constable in the garden, as if he were a professor delivering a lecture on the anatomy of a crime. He paced the floor, his tall frame casting a long, dancing shadow in the moonlight, his voice a low, resonant hum that filled the small, silent room. "The case," he began, "was, from the very beginning, a study in deception. We were presented with the story of a family curse, of a haunted house, of a series of tragic, yet seemingly unrelated events. But beneath this veneer of Gothic superstition, there lay a story of a much more human evil, a story of greed, of vengeance, and of a stolen legacy." He laid out the entire twisted history of the Harrington family, from the murder of Dr. Alistair Blackwood to the secret will that had named his illegitimate daughter as the true heir to his discovery. He spoke of Eleanor's own discovery of her true parentage, of her arrival at Blackwood Manor not as a ward, but as an avenger, determined to reclaim what she believed was rightfully hers. "Alistair Finch," he continued, his voice a low, grim whisper, "was the first to die because he, too, had uncovered the secret. He was a brilliant botanist, and he knew that the crimson bloom was no ordinary flower. His research led him to the truth, and for that he was silenced. A tiny, poison-tipped dart, fired from the shadows of the greenhouse, was all it took. A quick, silent, and seemingly natural death. He then turned his attention to the second murder. Lord Harrington, he said, was a man already dying, a man consumed by fear and guilt. His death was a simple matter of convenience, a dose of the same poison administered in his nightly medicine, an act of chilling, calculated cruelty, designed to look like a natural death and to remove the final obstacle between the killer and her inheritance." As he spoke, Eleanor's composure began to crack. Her hands, which had been clenched at her sides, began to tremble. A low guttural sound, a mixture of a sob and a snarl, escaped her lips. "But the killer," Holmes continued, his voice rising with a new dramatic intensity, "made a series of small yet fatal mistakes. A dropped cufflink, a smear of mud on a dress, a cryptic note in a ledger. Each one a tiny thread which, when pulled, began to unravel the entire bloody tapestry of their crimes. And the final, fatal mistake was to underestimate their opponent. To believe that a simple trick, a feigned sleep, a handful of powder would be enough to outwit a mind that has dedicated itself to the study of human deception. He stopped his pacing and stood before her, his eyes burning with a cold, righteous fire. "The serpent, Miss Vance," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dramatic whisper, "was not the cufflink. It was you, the serpent in the garden, the bringer of death, the guardian of a terrible and poisonous secret. The game is over, and you have lost." It was at that moment that she finally broke. The icy composure shattered, and the raw, monstrous truth of her nature was revealed. She let out a wild, unearthly scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and despair. "Lost!" she shrieked, her voice a high, piercing sound that seemed to make the very glass of the conservatory vibrate. "I have not lost. I have won. I have taken back what was stolen from my family. The secret of the crimson bloom was my birthright, my legacy. The Harringtons were thieves and murderers. They stole my ancestors' genius, and they left him to die in poverty and disgrace. They deserved to die. They all deserved to die." Her confession was a torrent of venomous hatred, a river of poison that had been dammed up for years and was now finally released. She spoke of her lonely childhood, of her discovery of her true parentage, of the burning, all-consuming desire for vengeance that had driven her to this dark and terrible place. She was not a monster in her own mind. She was a purveyor of justice, an avenger of a past wrong. "Finch was a fool," she spat, her eyes gleaming with a wild, manic light. "He was a sentimental, meddling fool. He wanted to expose the secret, to give it to the world. He did not understand its power, its value. He had to be removed. And Lord Harrington, he was a weak, pathetic creature, a pale imitation of his murderous grandfather. He was a living symbol of the injustice that had been done to my family. His death was not a murder. It was a long overdue execution." Her words were a chilling insight into the mind of a killer, a mind so twisted by hatred and a sense of righteous entitlement that it had lost all connection to morality, to compassion, to the very concept of right and wrong. And then, in a final desperate act of defiance, she made her move. She still held the vial of antidote in her hand. With a sudden, swift movement, she uncorked it, and before either of us could react, she drank it, a triumphant, defiant smile on her lips. "You are too late, Mr. Holmes," she hissed. "You may have unmasked me, but you will not take me. I will not rot in a prison. I will join my ancestor in the darkness." It was a dramatic and seemingly final gesture. A killer, cornered and exposed, choosing to take their own life rather than face justice. But Holmes, of course, was one step ahead. "I think not, Miss Vance," he said, his voice calm and steady. "The vial you have just consumed contains nothing more than distilled water. The true antidote, I'm afraid, does not yet exist." The look of triumph on her face was replaced by one of pure, unadulterated fury. She let out a wild, animalistic scream and lunged at Holmes. Her fingernails extended like claws, her teeth bared in a vicious snarl. She was a whirlwind of rage, a creature of pure, primal violence. She caught Holmes by surprise, her attack so sudden and so ferocious that he stumbled back, losing his footing on the damp stone floor. It was at that moment that I, who had been momentarily paralyzed by the burning pain in my eyes, was able to act. My vision was still blurred, but I could see the two figures, locked in a desperate struggle. I did not hesitate. I threw myself forward, my shoulder catching Eleanor in the side, sending her sprawling to the floor. She was up in an instant, her fury now directed at me. But before she could strike, the door of the conservatory burst open, and Constable Davies, his face pale but determined, rushed into the room. "It's over, miss," he said, his voice a trembling, yet firm command. "You are under arrest for the murder of Alistair Finch and Lord Harrington." The fight went out of her then. The rage, the fury, the defiance. It all seemed to drain away, leaving her a small, pathetic, and utterly broken figure. She slumped to the floor, her body racked with sobs of despair. The serpent had been defanged. The game was well and truly over. The aftermath was a quiet, somber affair. Eleanor Vance was taken away, her hands bound, her face a mask of tear-streaked, defeated rage. The servants, who had been huddled in the hall, emerged from their hiding places, their faces a mixture of relief and disbelief. The curse of Blackwood Manor had been lifted, but the truth was, in its own way, even more terrible than the legend. Lady Harrington, when she was told the news, received it with her customary icy composure. But as she turned to walk away, I saw a single tear trace a path down her pale, wrinkled cheek. It was a tear of grief, of relief, of a lifetime of secrets and sorrows finally brought to an end. As the first pale light of dawn began to break over the skeletal trees of the garden, a profound sense of peace descended upon the house. The storm had passed, both outside and within. The evil that had taken root in this dark and silent place had been exposed and destroyed. And as Holmes and I stood in the quiet, empty library, the first rays of the morning sun glinting on the cryptic silver cufflink that still lay on the desk, I knew that this was a case I would never forget. The case of the Crimson Bloom was over, and the world, for a brief, fleeting moment, seemed a little less dark.